I Hate the News is the weekly news bulletin from I Hate Politics podcast, a show about a human activity we love to hate. I am Sunil Dasgupta. It's August 5th, 2025. A new study from the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments Transportation Planning Staff has found that FEMA flood maps, which have long shaped land use policy, rescue planning, insurance markets, and home buying, account for only 15% of flooding-related road closures in the region over the last 20 years, which means that FEMA flood maps are inadequate and local officials need to update maps and possibly laws. The Montgomery County Education Association, the teachers' union, last week filed a grievance against MCPS, Montgomery County Public Schools, for delays and inaccuracies in payroll. MCPS Superintendent Thomas Taylor provides a fix-by date. Rockville City Council, for a second year in a row, nixed rent stabilization discussion 5-2. We have analysis from Council member Isola Shaw, who has championed the cause. Washington Post sees an exodus of top talent with employee buyouts and publisher Will Lewis asking those who disagree with the paper's new direction to leave. And after decades of trying, citizen activists managed to kill the M-83 highway, which was originally conceived 60 years ago when the Capital Beltway was to be followed by more concentric roadways in the future. And more. Stay with us.
I Hate Politics is brought to you by the Political Science Program at UMBC Shady Grove, where you'll learn a strong foundation in public policy, pre-law, and international affairs for an impactful career in a number of essential areas. Learn more at shadygrove.umbc.edu.
She got a face that you can't read, like it was chiseled there in stone. Shows all the pain, the troubles she has known.
I Hate Politics is a podcast about our neighborhoods, workplaces, schools and streets, and our local governments as they function in diverse and democratic societies. This means our politics are messy, dirty, sometimes corrupt, with often self-serving politicians. But no matter how much we may hate politics, we are never exempt from it, even when we refuse to participate. In fact, the purpose of politics is to keep society functioning, precisely when we don't agree with each other, like now. Music for this episode comes from DC area roots band, The Longtimers. Tom Clifford on vocals and guitar, Ben Holmes on drums and vocals, Mo Nelson on upright bass and vocals, and Pete Rose on guitars and vocals. You can find them at Hank Dietl's Tavern on Rockville Pike and other musical establishments in the area.
From each time she got burned, she can't tell you nothing about love. She don't know what it's like to be cared for. She's got all the answers till you ask her about love. No one's ever loved a girl before.
Climate change is not just about coastal sea level rise. We are seeing increasing inland flash flooding in cities and counties, marooning cars, damaging homes, sometimes with fatal consequences. 2 weeks ago, a Montgomery County Fire and Rescue Service engine became stuck in high waters that had flooded over the banks of Sligo Creek in Silver Spring. Over decades, local jurisdictions have used FEMA flood zone maps for everything from land use planning to water rescues. But increasingly, flooding has happened in locations that are not on FEMA maps. A study that compares water-related road closures in the Washington, D.C. region to the FEMA maps shows how outdated those maps are, and yet government agencies and, incredibly, insurance and home buyers depend on them. Catherine Rhinone is a transportation resilience planner with the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments Transportation Planning Board.
One thing that I am working on finalizing with our GIS team is this map of reported road closures due to flooding in the past 20 years. And what we did was overlap that with the FEMA floodplains. And of those reported road closures due to flooding in our region, only 15% of them were in a FEMA designated floodplain. 85% of the road closures in the past 20 or so years in our region were not in a FEMA designated floodplain. Between that information, that map, and the reported observations from our stakeholders saying we know that XYZ area floods and it's not in this original vulnerability assessment, those two pieces of analysis and information, again, show how important it was to get a different data set to work complementary with the FEMA data. We looked at a couple of different data sets, and the one that we chose to move forward with is called Fathom US Flood Map. What Fathom does is that's different than FEMA is that it takes into account future flooding, and it also takes into account precipitation, so rainfall, and it also looks at digital elevation. So it uses LiDAR data, so that means it understands better than the original FEMA data low points, high points.
Fathom is a private company, and LiDAR is a satellite data.
Yes, Fathom is a UK-based company, but they have US flood maps that we were able to acquire.
We will do a longer Friday episode with Catherine Rhinone on floodplains. Stay tuned for that.
Making love to everyone else. She never took the time off to find love for sale. But you light another cigarette.
MCPS staff and teachers have been abuzz this summer, and going back to spring and fall as well, about payroll errors and delays, so much so that the Teachers Union, MCEA, Montgomery County Education Association, has filed a class action grievance within the collective bargaining framework. Montgomery County Education Association President David Stein explains the problem.
What makes this particular grievance a little different is that it's a class action grievance. In other words, it's not focused on one particular situation, but a whole group of situations. Our members have been having a lot of trouble with our new payroll system. And so we've had a new payroll system in MCPS since, I guess, January 1st. And there have been a whole series of issues getting people correct pay, getting people on time pay. It's been a particular problem in the summertime when my members are entering in irregular hours for summer school and other activities. And then we had some problems with some people simply not getting a check. There are leave issues.
What is the scope of the problem?
Well, that's what we're trying to figure out. We know there were several dozen who didn't get a paycheck last Friday, and we think we have resolved those, but there are several hundred more of problems.
David Stein, please come back when you know more.
I will, Sunil Dasgupta.
Asked what he was going to do about it, MCPS Superintendent Thomas Taylor said,
Well, I think you're looking at an expected fixed date of end of this week. This is the first full week of August, and we expect to have everything in order by the end of the week. Some of this, unfortunately, is not a vendor that we can blame something on or a third party who isn't doing their job. Don't get me wrong, there's plenty of issues with our human capital management system and our payroll system. I would love to thrust a lot of responsibility onto somebody else, but there's human error. And we are contending with a couple of instances of human error, some that are easier to fix than others. We had a group of employees this summer that was not classified properly in the system in terms of how they were to be paid. That was human error that just needed to be fixed. And once corrected, it was corrected. There's a whole separate issue in terms of part-time employees who work in the summertime and making sure that the documentation was entered properly into the system so people could enter their hours. You don't enter your hours, you don't get paid. And candidly, that was a big barrier, and that's the one that we're working to resolve right now. As painful as it is to say this is not just a this year problem. This was a problem last year, the year before it, and the year before that. So the learning that has come from this is we need to have a different way of managing this in the future. And as quick as it would be and easy as it would be to blame someone else, this one's on us. And we need to make sure that we pay our people when they're should be paid and exactly what they're owed. And we need to make sure that there's recompense when that doesn't happen.
End of this week, huh?
Yeah.
Okay. The full interview with MCPS Superintendent Thomas Taylor will be out this Friday. Stay tuned. In other news, the Montgomery County Inspector General's office has found that MCPS has not been monitoring the criminal histories of 12,000 employees it was supposed to be watching regularly as part of a new law passed just before the pandemic, but was forgotten in the chaos of the pandemic. The report also says that nearly 5,000 employees have not been screened by Child Protective Services before gaining access to student information. It seems there is disagreement between MCPS and the Inspector General over who is responsible for CPS screenings. MCPS believes it is the Department of Health and Human Services. 3 weeks before the start of the school year, this is yet another fire for the school district to put out.
Hoping you'll hold on to every word you said, but she can't tell you nothing about love.
Rent control, or its evolved brother, rent stabilization, has been a politically salient issue in local governments, especially in high rent locations such as Montgomery County. The county itself passed rent stabilization in 2023, which housing supply advocates say has led to investment in apartment buildings in the county to dry up. Last week, the city of Rockville, which is not covered by the county rent stabilization law, for a second year considered rent caps but rejected the discussion 5-2. City Council member Isola Shaw has been a champion of rent stabilization.
On July 21st, Dr. Miles and I made a motion to pass a rent cap. And that rent cap is similar to Montgomery County's rent cap and Prince George's County's rent cap. And so that rent cap would be 6% or CPI, Consumer Price Index, plus 3%. And that was rejected by my colleagues. This wasn't a specific bill. This was a framework for a discussion. What I had in my mind initially is that we would have a good faith conversation, starting with a 3%. But if we're not able to push through with a rent cap, then the rest of the conversation and the different measures, which are essentially the standard pieces of a rent stabilization bill, we weren't able to discuss. I had proposed discussion on a rent cap, exemptions, a petition, like there has to be a way that landlords, need to have a waiver, as well as enforcement. And those are the basic building blocks of a rent stabilization bill, of the 200 bills across the country. And so I know that my colleagues and I are in different places. And so I wanted to really bring us together on this based on the need of what the community had shared. And also, frankly, based on the failure of what was essentially passed last year with providing incentives to landlords if and when they follow the voluntary rent guidelines. That was not working.
We do see rent stabilization enacted at the county level. Why do you think rent stabilization is less attractive to city council members, your colleagues?
Some of my colleagues were arguing their concern of building more multifamily buildings or building more rental units. Based on data, that just doesn't seem to be true. And in fact, our city staff presented us with a briefing saying that rent stabilization does not impact new development, oftentimes because new development is exempt from the majority of rent stabilization bills. Another reason could be that there was a concern about conditions, which is a valid concern because we want to make sure everyone lives in quality housing. We address our conditions through code enforcement and through ensuring that we have a good staff in terms of code enforcement, and as well as ensuring that landlords understand their responsibility to take care of their property. The rent cap is typically higher than the average market rent increase.
In order for you to get rent stabilization, you have to get your colleagues on board. They have provided reasons you don't think are valid, so you don't really have to address them. So what can you do in order to get them on board?
Although I do not agree with these reasons, the reason why we serve is to serve the people of Rockville. And I do think continuing to listen to their constituents.
Do you think they are not listening to their constituents? So they will lose elections if they are not listening to their constituents, but members of the council have been reelected. So if they were not listening, they would not be reelected.
I will also say that in Rockville, I don't think before 2023, there was a very strong tenant presence in City Hall to the degree that there is now. I mean, there are multiple tenant associations popping up throughout Rockville. There's a number of tenant leaders coming to City Hall regularly.
So it's your belief that the tenant mobilization movement is going to convince your other colleagues to change their mind on rent stabilization. Is that your hope?
I think that the tenant movement has influenced my colleagues where they are. I don't think that the city of Rockville has focused on housing to this extent in the past or has listened to tenant issues.
So what is going to make your colleagues listen to tenants' issues? They just rejected your proposal. What needs to change so that your colleagues change their minds? Could they convince you to change your mind?
No.
Why wouldn't they say the same thing?
Having watched now hundreds of people come to City Hall, having watched a number of people no longer living in Rockville, and they were fighting to live in Rockville, watching people with, the past 2 weeks or past 3 weeks or so, I had 15 families come to me with double-digit rent increases.
What if they say, which I think they do, that they are getting a different message from the public than you are getting?
Being a renter in Rockville in 2025, and none of my colleagues are currently renting in 2025, I'm a little closer to the problem.
Aizola Shah, thank you for taking the time to explain rent stabilization in Rockville.
Thank you so much for having me, Sunil.
She don't know what it's like to be cared for. She's got all the answers till you ask her.
The Washington Post, the DMV's paper of record, which is now owned by Amazon boss Jeff Bezos, is going through more upheaval. Robert McCartney used to be the Post's metro editor in the aughts and a columnist for the paper. He retired from the Post several years ago.
There are three main things happening at the Washington Post right now. The first thing, which is getting a lot of attention, of course, is a major loss of talent and experience. It was coming in waves before, But with the buyout that was offered, big names like Dan Baltz in politics, David Von Draley in opinion, Sally Jenkins, beloved sports writer, and now Michael Williamson, a two-time Pulitzer-winning photographer, have all left. The second thing that's going on is that there has been a shift to the right in the opinions section. And this has become visible, I would say, in the last month or two. This is in line with Jeff Bezos's diktat of several months ago that the entire opinions section would be devoted exclusively to promoting free markets and personal liberties. And a number of liberal columnists have left. Some have left the opinion page and gone to the news side, like Karen Tumulty and Dana Milbank. The others have left the paper entirely, like Ruth Marcus and Eugene Robinson. And you can see that they're both in the editorials and in the op-eds and the people selected to write the op-eds, that it's moved to the right. It hasn't gone over, full MAGA, full Trump by any means, but it's definitely moved to the right. And I would expect that we would see more of that as time goes on. And then the third thing that's going on, which in some ways is the most concerning, is it's become clear that the publisher, the somewhat controversial publisher, Will Lewis, has articulated no strategy for what to do with the paper, except perhaps to save money and thus reduce losses by cutting staff. His big innovation was supposed to be the creation of a third newsroom, which was going to sort of focus on soft coverage and stuff aimed at social media, at young people, at news you can use, entertainment, fun stuff, basically. And at least that was, to the extent that we had any idea what it was going to be, that's what it was. And that was announced with great fanfare about a year ago. And now it's been apparently scrapped. They say they're going a completely new way with the third newsroom. The person who was heading it, Chrissa Thompson, is leaving the paper. And it's apparently going to not even have anything to do with or it's not going to be linked directly to the newsroom at all. It's going to be linked to the business side. And they're going to be trying to commercialize the product somehow in ways that haven't really been laid out. If there was supposed to be any Will Lewis magic, it's not evident at all, except in the departure of so much staff. The fact is, it's still a really great newspaper. They still break a lot of news. I mean, they're the only paper competitive on national and international news with the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal right now. You can replace a lot of the people who are leaving with very talented, younger, lower cost people. I wouldn't give up on the paper at all. They still do a lot of good accountability reporting, a lot of good investigative stuff, but it's changing dramatically, and we're really not sure where it's going to end up. I'll tell you the story they've done a terrible job on is the debate in Montgomery County over the zoning changes. Hugely important story. They finally did a story on it, about a week ago?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was maybe, 2 months late. It was completely inadequate. It covered issues, but considering the importance of the topic to the people in the county, it was completely inadequate. And if it had been the same thing in the district, they would have had 10 stories. I'll tell you another example. I don't see any aggressive accountability coverage for Wes Moore. Like, Wes Moore is being touted as a presidential candidate, right? A presidential candidate in his first term as governor, right? What's he done as governor to warrant any kind of consideration as a presidential candidate, apart from being handsome and well-spoken?
Well, you can find that coverage on I Hate Politics. Bob McCartney, thank you.
You're welcome. Be well.
She ain't got nothing about love. She ain't got nothing about love. She can't give it nothing about love. She ain't had
The original planning for the Washington metropolitan area in the 1950s and the 1960s included several concentric highways, both inside and beyond the current Capital Beltway. M-83 was going to be a beltway further out connecting what is now Montgomery Village and Clarksburg. The highway entered the county's master plan for highways and remained there for decades. Finally, last week, the Montgomery County Council voted to remove the main stretch of the highway from the county's master plan document. Diane Cameron is a spokesperson for TAME Coalition, which stands for Transit Alternatives to Mid-County Highway Extended. The group has been fighting against the M-83 highway all this while.
On Tuesday, July 29th of 2025, the County Council voted by a majority of 10 in favor and 1 opposed. They voted to remove the proposed M-83 highway, also called Mid-County Highway Extended, its northern section from the Master Plan of Highways and Transitways. And the northern section is over 5 miles long. And then there's also a southern section that is less than 1 mile in length that's proposed for part of the Rock Creek watershed in the Redland community. And they did not decide to remove that smaller southern section, but they did decide to remove the large 5-mile northern section from the master plan. And there is more administrative work to happen to fulfill and to implement that decision. But that decision has been made, and for our coalition, Transit Alternatives to Mid-County Highway Extended, TAME Coalition, we are thrilled with this council decision, and we are definitely celebrating it.
You've been fighting this for a long time, decades now. What is your primary opposition?
2 core reasons why we do not want M-83. Protecting our forests and our parkland, which includes our streams and wetlands and part of our drinking water supply and our clean air, is one of our major reasons. And our other major reason is that we want transit and walkability and bikeability for the up-county. So we genuinely want to be able to travel to and from locations in Clarksburg, Germantown, Gaithersburg, Montgomery Village, without having to drive. And we want to make sure that people who either cannot drive or choose not to drive have options to get around. And so the more we provide transit and walkable options, we believe that the whole quality of life for everyone in the up county and in many ways for the entire county will improve. So it's to protect our forests and to enable transit and walking and biking are the 2 core reasons why we have opposed M-83.
Which council member opposed?
Councilmember Marilyn Balcom was the sole vote on the council to oppose the removal of M-83 from the master plan.
Diane Cameron, thank you for taking the time.
Thank you, Sunil.
That's all for this episode. Be sure to check out our feature interview series that come out Friday mornings. I Hate Politics is produced by me, Sunil Dasgupta, with support from the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. I direct UMBC's political science program at the universities at Shady Grove in Montgomery County, where, among other things, we explore and learn about politics, government, and society close to home. Music for this episode comes from DC area roots band, The Longtimers. Tom Clifford on vocals and guitar, Ben Holmes on drums and vocals, Mo Nelson on upright bass and vocals, and Pete Rose on guitars and vocals. You can find them at Hank Dietl's Tavern on Rockville Pike and other musical establishments in the area. If you want to share your music on the show or know someone else who might want to, please email us at producer@ihppod.org. I hope you'll subscribe and share the podcast as we bring you stories about politics close to you and to your home. See you next time.